So there we go. Welcome everybody, wherever you are joining us from. And no doubt at the rate that people fill this room these mornings, we may have one or two new people joining us. If it is your first time, welcome. As Craig said, you'll notice the chat is already warming up. It gets quite busy in there. You're very welcome to drop your comments, drop your thoughts, drop your additions. There's lots of wisdom hiding behind the screens that we can't see, but we would love to hear from you in there. As Craig said, if you have a particular question, our job is to answer it. None of this, as you might be able to tell, is scripted. So your questions are vital to us. Pop them in the Q&A on my screen. It sits next to the chat and it's on the right-hand side as I look at it. It may be slightly different depending which version of Zoom you're using. Craig will follow both of those and pick up as much as he can. For those of you who are with us here in Alberta and have been before, you'll know this is a very important and regular part of our slot on a Friday morning. And that is just to pause for a moment and recognize the land that we're situated on. Craig and I are both coming to you from our homes. However, SAIT's main campus is in Calgary. That's the view from probably about the top floor, maybe the second to top floor of Heritage Hall. And now that our turf is renewed, it looks a little bit like that, not quite the same. SAIT is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So today that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Thank you. Wherever you are, just always appreciate the land where we are and the history and heritage and stories that have come before us. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, today we are going to talk about listening. And as Jenny mentioned, please do carry on the conversation in the chat and pop your questions into the Q&A, which will be exactly what I should not be doing, is monitoring both of those while trying to listen to Jenny speak. So I will not be demonstrating very good listening skills at points in this conversation today. But Jenny, listening is so incredibly important. I think most people, if you are a leader, the people on your team just want to be heard. And as an individual, you want to be heard as well. Mm-hmm. So how do we make sure we get this right? Where does it go wrong? Why is it so, there's so many directions we could take this morning about the importance of listening, but why don't we just start with, what is it? What is good listening? What is listening?
I'm so tempted to say pardon right now.
Leave the sarcasm to me.
No, listening, you captured probably more than an hour just in the questions there at the beginning where you went. Listening in its simplest form is making sense of sound. That's what we do when we listen. And we do it a couple of different ways. We do it through pattern recognition. So we pick up signals within the noise. And then we also do it by differencing. And there's a key point right there that stands out. So if differencing is important to us, so we can pick up a voice in a room, those of you who have kids, if they play sport and you're a parent, they will hear your voice within the audience, which is why all the coaches always want us to stop talking, apart from cheering positively, of course. But what we do is we pick up those key sounds, but we discount sounds that remain the same. So people who have a very monotonous voice have trouble being heard because it's hard to pick up the differencing within the sound. So what we do, our toolbox is our voice, but the communication is actually in the hands of the listener because it's what they pick up, the signals, the noise that they pick up from there. It's how they make sense of it.
Okay, so how do we help others? Can you help others make sense of your noise, if that makes any sense whatsoever, right? So, ultimately what we're getting at is how do you listen better, right? How do you make sure people feel valued? when you hear them. Because I think that ultimately is what we're trying to do here, right? You want whoever's speaking to you to feel valued and important, and that you've understood what they have just said to you.
Yeah, I want to pick up on, you said it now a couple of times, people want to be heard. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about connection or we're just talking about effective communication. It's the key in there is heard and understood. And so we're quite good at hearing. We're quite good at hearing all sorts of noise, but it's the and understood piece that's really, really important. And that's really important. It doesn't matter where in your life you are, that's important. And, you know, if you dig into the work of Brené Brown, if you want to build connection, we've got to add valued in there as well. She'll use the word seen, but I think if you hear and understand somebody, you show them that you see them. So how can we help it? I mean, the first thing, if you're listening, is that shift. The term active listening is so common that we almost switch off, which is funny. If we're talking about active listening and we switch off when we hear the term active listening. And the cursory ones are, well, you know, pay attention. Okay, but what does pay attention actually mean? And so I can sit here, like you do it beautifully. You can be on the screen and you can nod, but at the same time you're looking at the Q&A and you've got to follow the chat and you're trying to think of the next, like all the odds are stacked against you at this point to be able to listen effectively. And so I think the first thing is to recognize, how do you listen? Like, what is the energy that you put into listening? How are you consuming that noise that's coming towards you? And so if you think about 101 workplaces, or even me standing in my kitchen, I don't too close to hand, but you know, if I'm on my cell phone doing something and our daughter asks me a question, yep, so if I'm listening, I'm not listening. And John Amici, he puts it beautifully. I think it's so important to remember. He said, how prepared are you to swivel your chair completely? And by that, if somebody came in here right now, I could quite easily be doing some work and hold a conversation. But actually, for me to pay attention to them, I'd have to swivel my chair completely. And you don't have to be sitting to do that. Have you turned and faced one? Are you engaged in the conversation? And that's always going to take me, you know, my favorite quote, be more interested than you are interesting. And that's not easy. That requires a level of curiosity that we don't come by naturally. A lot of the time, some people do, but most of the time, once we're busy, we don't.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that quote often makes me think too, the Ted Lasso clip that goes around forever now with him playing darts, right? About being curious, not judgmental. That is, it's the exact same thing. How do you lean in and really try to think different? Just suspend your belief, suspend your ideas, suspend your thinking, to truly try and understand what somebody is saying to you. Like how often as a leader does somebody come to you and you have already presupposed, as they start their comments, what they want, what they're thinking, what the answer is. I'm great at having all the answers. At least that's what my wife tells me. But before you let them ask, you're already there with the answer.
Yes. Okay. So to help, right, that you gave us half of a brilliant statement. Like, just pop it on a post-it note, stick it in the back of your head. Like, remember, are you judging or are you joining the conversation?
Sorry, did you say I gave you half of a brilliant idea?
No, brilliant sentence. You said judging it. Like, that's where we're going. You are brilliant. It's Friday.
Thank you.
But are you judging or joining? And your point is really, really important, because if you come in believing that the other person in the conversation doesn't have anything of value to give you, how can you possibly listen? Like, you just can't. And, you know, when it comes to, as you said, you've already solved the problem. You've already got your brilliant advice ready, steady to go. And you haven't heard anything that's been really said. And so you potentially end up solving the wrong problem, or simply throwing noise back at the other person. And so, to come into a conversation where you actually want to listen, there has to be a belief that other person has value. We have to meet them on the level. And so often we're not. And that's why collaboration in a lot of workplaces just falls flat on its face, because we all carry a little ego into that room. We all have the best ideas, and we stop listening in order to hear everything that's around the room. And, we often talk about, I think I've seen it in the chat, the distractions that are around us interrupt with our listening. So the best terminology I've heard put to it is our regular listening, where all the distractions are filtering in. That's stingy listening. And we're very stingy with our listening. Whereas the other end of the continuum would be generous listening. And so in that generous listening, we've removed the distractions. But the distraction that we often forget is the voice that's in our head. And so if we're listening to reply, if we're listening thinking that we have the answer, there's a whole ton of me too. So you're telling me a story, I'm like, yeah, and I did this, or I had this experience, and I want to tell you about this. The minute that those click in, now we're not able to listen to with that generosity that is at the full end of the continuum. And so it's not just the distractions around us. That's essential. Like, yes, put your cell phone away. And by the way, doing this, where you see your smartwatch, is just as bad as having your cell phone in front of you. Like, get rid of the distractions. But we have to calm down the interruptions that are in our head as well. And a lot of those are judgment interruptions. So join the conversation as opposed to judge. And when you join, you have a level of curiosity, I think.
Well, and it's a matter of give and take as well, right? We've talked about this, your beach ball analogy about how you're both coming at it. I was hoping for props, Jenny. But you do have it. Sorry, I wasn't listening very well.
I do. Yeah.
All right, but you do. You can sometimes come at it from different sides, and depending on in some individuals, some roles are, I put this, but probably better suited at the art of listening versus other roles, other jobs, professions where you really want to influence an idea, you want to influence an outcome, and so that's where you often come at it from different sides, right? Because you're coming into it of, I've got a point and a place of view, and maybe entirely different than yours. So how do we find our way closer together versus I'm going to make my point, right?
Yes. So a couple of things within there. You mentioned the word influence. If I'm going to do this verbally as well as visually, because some people can see it and soon people will be listening, not necessarily seeing. But if you imagine or can see the beach ball, if you see your version of the idea, Craig, is very blue and my idea is very green. And when we start, neither of us has any idea of the other side. So there's basically two truths, two perceptions, two realities. When we want to influence, very often you'll come with everything from your perspective, your importance, your urgency, and your need. And that's where you come from. And the hardest thing for us to perhaps understand is the other person doesn't really care, because they don't know, and that's not the urgency and the importance in their life. And so if you want to start to get that person to buy in, to lean in, is actually to think about what is it like for them, what's there, what matters to them. And often in the workplace, you want to influence someone, think about what is it that they're measured on, or what's their, what are their important parts. That's a great place to start, because they care about that. And that gives us that in piece. But the other part is, if it's a difficult conversation, or it's a point where, I'm digging my heels in, I'm resisting whatever it is that the change that you're trying to put on, or the different process, or the new way, or whatever that might be, if that resistance piece, how do you shift me from resisting to listening? And so, you might walk away and say to whoever, like, oh God, talking to Jenny is like banging your head against a brick wall. And this is another thing, I think it came from Mark Goulston. And what he says is, stop banging your head against a brick wall. Look for the loose brick. because that's how we get a foot in. But if you're not hearing me and making an attempt to understand me, you'll never find that loose brick. You just keep going to the same firm part of the brick wall and banging your head against it. I would say, like, how many times do I have to tell that person? Well, the message came that many times from whoever. And so we have to come back and look for something different or approach it differently.
Yeah. And then I was just going to, you triggered something there for me around the approach. And what I'm thinking of is how often, as the individual communicating, do you actually stop to say, hey, listen, Jenny, I feel like you're resisting what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right. Can I get you to, and just ask for that. Can I get you to suspend your thinking for a second and just, be curious about what I'm saying? It's people don't talk that way though. Right. And I think that's where it gets incredibly awkward to be able to say, to call somebody out. It's quite easy with your kids or your spouse or your partner to say, hey, you're not listening to me. But for some reason, at least in my experience, you don't see that in the office near as often.
And there's a difference between you're not listening to me, which is almost an attack. Like it's to your point, what you said is a little parental. Whereas what if, I don't feel heard. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, that's almost a request. And so even there's an important part in there is our language. But the other part that you said there, I feel that you're resisting me. And we have 3 levels of listening. And so the first level of listening is where I'm doing the talking, we're in conversation, I'm doing the talk, but it's all about me. So I'm only concerned about my blue side of the beach. Oh no, I was green. My green side of the beach ball, everything that's going on here, that's what I'm listening for. So I'm listening to pick up what I need. I'm listening to solve my problem. I'm listening for everything on my side of the equation. And from there, we move to sort of that second level. And now in the second level, it's all about you. And this is where people often go to when they first start looking at improving their listening, but they forget their part in the conversation. And we've said this numerous times, a conversation is like a game of catch. And there's a rhythm and a cadence to it, and eventually a voice share. Like we're 50-50 in this conversation. And so in that second level of listening, we're actually no better because we've popped it all on you. We've left us out of there. Well, that doesn't end up with anybody feeling fulfilled, valued, connected. And so that third level of listening is me, you, and everything in between. And so when you feel resistance, like you can see resistance, you can feel resistance, you might not actually hear it. And so there's that listening part in what is in the bubble in between us. And that's often an important part to connect with, is the sentence was right. Jenny, I feel a resistance. What else do I need to know? What am I missing that's causing that resistance? I can't see it. What do you see that I don't see? And open the door. There's the generosity to hear something that might actually clash completely with your experience. And this is where the generosity comes in, because our one is to negate that experience. Oh, don't be silly, it will be fine. And then but I'm not being silly. This is my experience. And there's the heard and understood. And so that's the generosity that we're looking for, I believe.
No, I like that. And I think what I like, what I like that you did there is you put it back on yourself as the communicator, as opposed to putting it on the other person, right?
Yeah.
I'm not feeling heard is very different than you're not listening. So no, that is really good. I managed to listen to just about all of that and pop that in the chat.
That is on fire. Like,
so how do we get better at this then, right? And then there's lots of conversation going on here about the number of distractions. To your point, the phone, the watches, I've got 3 screens in front of me right now. all of them are related to what we're talking about, but it's all there. I'm trying to take some notes. We've got folks like, how do we get better at the listening piece? And how do you, there's the other side of this too, because it's a very divergent thought. So as usual, I'm going multiple directions with my questions. But how do we get better at listening as an individual? And then because so many of us work in teams, how do we get better as teams as listening to each other? I don't know if there's divergent thoughts there or if it's the same.
Let's go individual. There's a couple of avenues if we're talking about trying to improve as an individual. So in general, we're reducing people's ability to listen because of the amount of noise that's in our way. And so a couple of the things, and these are, I'm pretty sure all of these stem from, there's a gentleman called Julian Treasure. For those of you who like TED Talks, he's got about 6 of them, and they're all to do with talking and listening. And that is a couple of the ones that he mentions is, just find silence. Just find silence and he suggests, I'm pretty sure he suggests 3 minutes a day. Can you find silence for 3 minutes a day? And in this day and age, it's actually really hard to find silence. So relatively quiet would be good. But just by stopping for those 3 minutes a day, apparently we will improve our ability to listen. And it's incredible what does happen when you do that. And I think a lot of that too is not only are we improving our listening, but we have a ton of noise in our head. We have a ton of noise in the world. And somewhere in between there's a space. And that space is really, really healthy. And it's healthy for our own minds, but it's also healthy for improving our ability to hear and to listen. And then within that, okay, you're in the middle of a really noisy place. I was on campus yesterday in one of the buildings. Like, it is and it's vibrant and it's fantastic. And what I'll often do is just stop and see how many different sounds I can hear. Like, what different conversations can you hear? What different languages can you hear being spoken around you? There's a meter to it. If you're near Starbucks has a whole sound, there's a cacophony of stuff going on compared to the voices at Subway, compared to the students. So what can you hear in the, like, just become aware of how you're consuming the sound around you. And then when it comes to us one-on-one, like in an actual conversation, good colleague of ours, Evan Westlake, he's been on with us as well in the morning. He said one time, and I love it, like, listen for the next question to ask. So when you're in conversation with someone, listen for the next question to ask them. And that's actually a fascinating thing to put into practice, because often the next question that you have, they answer if you're listening. And so your question changes as you move, but no longer do we ask a question that they're like, I've just said that. You don't, because you're listening for the next question to ask. And then the other one that I'd throw out there, and this is rich and it's really difficult, but let's bring back the pause. Let's bring back active silence, because people, when you sort of digest what you've heard, when you think about it, there's some great quality of thought that comes out of there. And that's a really good one for teams as well. You know, we think that, especially as we move, more and more places move back to face-to-face. If we're holding a face-to-face meeting, it has to be busy and bubbly and vibrant and talking all the time and ideas and all the rest of it. But actually, what if we just stopped and paused for a moment and all thought about what was in front of us? And I think it's Amazon, isn't it, that's banned PowerPoints in their meetings. Yep. And they all spend the first half hour reading a memo. But, you know, it's slightly different, but it is, I've just caught the chat for once. And Tom, be comfortable with the uncomfortable silence. Yeah, like your kids will tell you, well, that's an awkward pause, but there's a lot that comes from that pause. And when you pause, your filters can all kick in as well. And so we're careful.
I love that one. And it is actually, you know, I've heard active silence. I've heard golden silence.
Yeah.
Been through training courses before that talk about golden silence. When you pose a question to somebody, why do we expect that they should be able to immediately answer? Right? You need to, good grief, even CBC had 7-second delay to keep Don Cherry on track. So what, that 7 seconds is about that.
Yeah.
Right. And man, that can be awkward if you were sitting there one-on-one with somebody and you pose the question and then you wait. Right. Now, there comes a point where you do need to potentially help them out. Like, it gets really more awkward if you start to go on 10, 15 seconds, unless of course somebody's telling you to hold on, thinking about it. But yeah, that act of silence just to let people think, I think is absolutely brilliant. And your comment around how do you take time just to hear nothing, right? I think there was a comment earlier in the chat around daily meditation practices. I don't know. I can't get all these voices up here to stop long enough to do that. But that's just me. So question I have as I'm going through here, I just want to take a look at some of the comments that we have. Silence being a great negotiation tactic. Yes, that's so true. Can be awkward. And the power of the pause. That's fantastic. The role, what role does trust play in listening? And so part of what we've talked about, and I think this comes into more of the team aspect as well, because we've had the comments in here around, the power of the pause and psychological safety as well, being a huge, if you're entering into a conversation with an individual or group that you have no psychological safety with, it's going to be a very different piece of communication. And odds are you probably are going to be coming in resisting, etc. Yeah. You're going to be judging. You're not going to be, you're going to be judgmental.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the role of trust.
So one of the fascinating things, I think, we'll go back to what we said before, be more interested than you are interesting. When you start to listen, you enable care, and care is one of those primordial sort of domains of trust. We assess a lot of trust based on care, based on how we see that care between us. And so when we start to build care just simply through listening, just simply by, as you said, stop the judging, join the conversation and listen, that builds the trust. And so listening is crucial to build the trust. And the other part of this is really important too, is think about how much of our work is done through conversation. So building trust in that conversation is essential. And so if we want to improve that all the way around, we want to improve the quality of our conversations. So that would be, trust is huge within here. And to your point on a team, if we're lacking that psychological safety, how do we open the door to help people to be able to listen? And so there's sort of 3 levels that you can do that within your team. So if you said to your team around your table, okay, what action will we take? That's a really vulnerable space, because for me to say what action I would take, the opportunity for judgment is huge, because my action might not be the same as somebody else's action, as someone else's, and we'll judge each other based on what we think is best.
Yeah. And it looks like we've run into a little glitch here, which has made it tough for us all to listen or to hear, Jenny. But I think, folks, as we look at the technical issue fixing itself, your ability to have that conversation with your team, I think, is something that you really need to think about as a leader, right? If you don't believe that you've got a great listening environment on your team, and you feel that your folks are struggling to share, I think you have to be, as a leader, you have to be willing to step up and try and engage that conversation, whether it be one-on-one, whether it be with the entire room. But how do you have that conversation with your team? So Jenny, just as you were dropping back in here, I was trying to pick up and talk about, as a leader, how do you engage your team in that conversation around, do you as a team feel heard? Right? If you are an individual on this team who does not feel heard, how do you help folks bring that forward? So I think that's kind of where you were going in this as well. So
I'm so sorry.
oh, that's okay. Hey,
Yeah,
we are all used to the tech issues, and we've been managing it very well here. So it's all good.
I believe you held the fort well from what I can see in the chat already. Okay, so how do we help people to feel heard? Let's hope I can get this out before it kicks me out again. 3 levels. I was talking about action. I don't know if I fell off before then, but the safest way to get people talking is ask them to describe something. Because if as our team, we describe how we see it, that is our perception. Remember, every one of us has a different colored stripe on the beach ball. And by leaning into those different descriptions, and a lot comes from you as the facilitator, leader, chair of that meeting, whatever that might be, in ensuring that each person is heard. So as I describe my situation, you can definitely be productive in your response and ask a question. Or say, has anybody else seen it this way? And, build on that. Or at the end, pick up on the commonalities that may appear between 1 or 2 people around the team. So description is really safe. And if we're moving through the levels to help people, we have to create that space for voice, and then we have to encourage the listening. And so description, assessment, action. Those are the 3 levels that you increase vulnerability as you move through those. And then as the facilitator, your job is that productive response to model it and help other people with that too. So if I'm talking and my colleague interrupts me, we don't want to tolerate that, because if you tolerate that, you've just said, okay, we can devalue anybody who's talking. We're not listening. So those would be sort of the rhythm if you're starting from a lower trust, lower psychological safety.
That piece is so important. And in the question or comment here around the fact that it seems like a catch-22 at times, right? And that you need to listen to build trust, but it can be hard to build trust if there's no safety. So absolutely correct. And that, I'll be honest, that's a difficult position to be in. Like, that is where, as a leader, you are really going to have to dig in and try and work one-on-one with folks, with your team together. If you've got individuals on your team that just have a natural tendency to clash and not listen, you may have to look at working something out with that pair. I don't know, thoughts on that? Like, if you were in such a situation as described here, how would you help a leader start to get their team out of that?
So if you need to pull backwards and build the social capital first, because until we have the trust in the relationship, we can't go where you want to go in the meeting room. And so we have to get to know each other. We have to begin to build the value, seen, heard, and valued. And so the way that we build the value is we build it by social capital. So, when you and I disagree, we know more beyond the job title and the person in front of us. And so it's very easy for us to disagree because we're disagreeing on the task in front of us, or on the way that we'll put something forward, or on the process that we'll do. It becomes less emotionally personal. And that's a really tricky concept too, because the easy flippant piece is to say to people, well, just don't take it personally. Like, be in the conversation, just don't, they're not being personal. There is nothing more personal than somebody face to face with you in conversation. And so the guide for a leader is, be crystal clear on what you're talking about. First of all, are we all heading in the same direction? And then what are you doing to set the stage for that? So what are the guardrails that you've put in place? What is effective dissent look like? what is okay and what is not okay. Like basically we're talking boundaries and norms and
Yep. And I love, and it's, sorry, as I'm picking up on the conversation here, right? The boundaries are huge. I love that. And I think it also goes to the point of setting expectation with your team. Often communication falls down if I'm asking you to do something and I'm not describing the outcome that I'm looking for.
Yes.
Right? Like, what are the expectations? And I think that's often, there's there's a terrific episode of Seinfeld where George gets assigned a job by his boss and he really didn't hear what the assignment was. And then he spends the entire episode trying to figure out what it was without ever bothering to go back and ask and clarify what was expected. It was much funnier than what I just described it as. But the other piece that is in here too. So those expectations and those tools that you can use. And Rick, it doesn't sound juvenile at all. Your comment about, using the rubber ball in the boardroom in terms of whoever has the ball gets to speak, right?
Yeah.
If that's a tool that you need to use and is effective for your team, why not? Right? Why wouldn't you do that? And then I'm going to assume that over time, something like that could and probably would be phased out, or it's just become a habit and a ritual that your organization uses. Nothing wrong with that.
Not at all. And our indigenous cultures use a talking stick. Like two things to take away from there. First, a circle for conversation as well, so that we can all see each other. Straight lines are nasty. And then that talking stick, and it's a valuable tool. The part too to be careful with, if it's new to you, how long can you have the rubber ball or the talking stick for? Because you can hold that ball for a long time. So then you may want to pop a measure on that.
Yeah, that's really, because you're then running into people that dominate the room, dominate the conversation. Terry has another great comment here, is that only works if somebody's comfortable holding the ball. How do you help people on your team who aren't necessarily comfortable speaking up to speak up?
Yeah.
Right. You don't expect everybody to speak all the time in every meeting, but as a team, you've got a job to participate. So how do you help?
Sorry. There's a lot that you can do prior to the meeting. So, what will we be talking about? There are those of us who will speak up and happily just blurt out. I'm classic. I speak to think. So often where I start is not where I finish. But there are others who would much rather spend that time preparing and thinking and coming with that. And so help people have something to say. Back to what we said before, those description, can we start at a lower level and progress forward with what we want? And we tend to sort of turn our noses up at that because it takes time. But that time that it takes, we're building capital, we're building understanding, all of that. It is worthy time. And then the other part is, how are you structuring your meeting? And this was our first conversation ever, Craig, but the value of the roundtable meeting is it's not great. Yeah. And so what's different? What can we do different than a roundtable? So even if you have a team of 8, let's say, you can start with that individual thought. There's that active silence. And then around your table of 8, have people just talk in pairs together about what they're thinking, what they're seeing. And if you want to go the full range, that we would often use, or liberating structures would purport, is go from 1 to 2 to 4. By the time you get to 4 and you come back around the table, your 2 happy speakers can give all the information, but they're representing the voices of so many people. There's so many different ways that we can structure and hold a meeting that creates space for voice. But if we just say, "Oh, Jenny, what do you think?" I might just prefer to dive under the table than tell you what I think. So I think that's, that requires some work on our part, and it requires doing it a little bit differently than maybe we're used to.
Yeah. I think we got time for one more question before we start to wrap up. And, this could be a very big catch-all, but what are tools to support people in improving conversation skills?
Tools to support people in, say it for me again, I'm listening.
Improving conversation skills. And I think we probably think about this from both sides.
Yeah.
The listening and the conversing. I guess technically you can't converse if you're not listening. It's just then a monologue, but
you're just chucking sentences. Yes.
Yeah.
I think let's try and keep it simple. First one, recognize that there's more than you in the conversation. Secondly, voice share. And voice share, we mean 50-50. Typically, a leader direct report conversation is like an 80-20 voice share. 80% of the leader talking, 20% of the employee talking. So let's get back to a 50-50. And then in that listening part, well, we said it, let's join the conversation, not judge it, and be curious to their experience, their perception, their reality. And that doesn't mean that you don't do any talking. It just means that we have now both talking.
Excellent.
That's my short
Love
version.
it.
You got to come
That's
and hang
great.
out with me for 2 days. You're going to have the full lot.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I know we have a lot of questions here, folks, that just started to roll in towards the end that we did not get to. We will figure out how to get them out in the show notes.
Yes.
So there are some great questions in here. You know, what's examples of effective dissent? How do you stop being interrupted constructively, etc. But we promise folks to get them out before 9 o'clock, and we are going to move on to big idea. Some questions. It's usually 3, but I don't think it's 3 today.
You caught me. So let's see if we can get there quickly. It's not been my day for technology. I do apologize for the number of times I have disappeared today. Apparently our internet is unstable. So we always finish with one big idea, 2 things that you can do straight away, which will add to what I was just talking about. And 3 questions was the ask. There may or may not be 4, as always. So one big idea is, and we talked about this, hopefully this came through, let's add a little bit more generosity, bring back the voice share, and see what happens to the quality of our conversations this weekend with the people that you're hanging out with. Listen more, see what happens there. And that's even our kids right through to family members, just the person that you buy your coffee from. 2 things that you can do straight away. We did talk about this one. I believe this one got out safe and sound, and that is bring back the pause. How do we create that space for ourselves, but also for others in our meetings and in our one-on-one conversations? Let's aim to make it not awkward, just sit with it. And that 7 seconds that Craig demonstrated, it doesn't feel as bad once you get used to it. It's only the first couple of times that it feels like a long time. And you may be interested in your own thoughts as well, whilst they think about it. The next one, the higher up you are in an organization, the more important this is. When did you last go out and listen? And literally just listen. Go talk with your people, not to your people. Go talk with your people. Increase that voice share. Have a genuine curiosity and a generosity in your listening. I've had lots of examples of skip level lunches, open coffees, those kind of things. Make it possible and pay attention. You'll be amazed what you might learn. And as Craig suggested, 3 questions that will leave you to noodle with. Where could you be more interested? When will you stop talking? One of the points where I lost my connection with you, Craig, was talking about questions. If you ask a question, stop talking. Often we ask the question and then we fill in before they've even had a chance to answer it. The WAIT acronym we didn't get to, it's brilliant. You can use it for why am I talking? Is it your turn in a meeting? Is it your turn? Why am I talking? But the other one people might find useful is what am I telling myself? So the story that we make up in our head can interfere in our listening as well. And then I popped an extra one in because it would just seems wrong to have 3 nowadays. We've always had more. And, you know, pay attention, where are you lost in your perspective? That side of the beach ball, it really, really matters to you. It's hard to remember that there is another perspective within there as well. So 1 idea, 2 strategies to take away, put them into practice, try them out today, and then 4 questions for you to noodle on as we leave you today.
Fantastic. Thank you, as always, Jenny. Folks, we're back in a couple of weeks, and we will talk about the power of team confidence. And, you know, it is easy to be confident when you've got a teammate like Jenny who puts such great content there that when the tech goes down, it makes it simple for even me to carry on and help things go forward. So have yourselves a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing everybody again very soon. Take care.
We do. Thank you.